I didn't feel like digging through the papers to find it. So I said, we will heal the world one person at a time by catering to their mental health needs with openness and compassion and professionality.
Wow.
That's all I said right there.
Good for you.
Yeah,
it's in your heart.
Well, it is. And, 10 years ago, I jumped off of being a consultant and back into one-on-one therapy and became a intensive trauma-focused therapist for that very reason. I want to heal the world one person at a time.
Yep.
And it's needed. We see it. The statistics are there. We all know there's an epidemic. And the bottom line is accessibility, I feel like. And, increasing accessibility. And I feel very strongly that IOP is the place to be. It's where you can get the help you need, the community you need, the support, the scaffolding to manage your life and manage what's going on in your heart and in your mind without the impact, the chaotic nature of the trauma of admitting to residential, because that's usually in a crisis circumstance.
Yeah. Welcome to Lift and Make Lighter podcast. I'm Tom Telford here with Margaret Bailey. Mm-hmm. So excited. We are in your offices, one of several, which is amazing how quickly you're growing as an organization. But we're in Bountiful today, right off I-15, super convenient location along the Wasatch Front in Utah. Mm-hmm. I could introduce you, but I'm not going to do justice because you've been at this a long time. You're a mental health professional. You're a business owner, entrepreneur, business partner with an incredible husband and business mind. So I want you to just introduce, if you don't mind, from your perspective and in your words, who you are, all of it. Just give us a background and some information about you.
Well, above all, I'm my daughter's mom. She is 7, going to turn 8 in 2 weeks, and she's in her world. Yep. And we also have a 21-year-old who is fabulous, and he actually works for us here. He does outreach because he really believes in this as well. So
that's awesome.
Bottom line is I'm a marriage and family therapist. I've been at this for more years than I can count, I think, or would care to admit. I worked in residential for a decade. I worked in private nonprofit for a decade. I became a therapeutic consultant working with families to find placements for people who needed specialized treatment. I did that for a decade, and then I jumped off and decided I was going to be saving the world one person at a time as a trauma therapist. So, got certified in EMDR and in all the newer techniques that EMDR has generated that are even faster than EMDR. And then also certified as a trauma-focused intensive therapist, which means I work with one client 6 hours a day, consecutive days, until I knock out all the trauma.
Wow.
Using these new techniques.
6 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Usually takes 1 to 2 weeks for people.
Wow.
So that's that log jam that they can get through.
So many questions about that. Keep going. Keep intro.
And then a couple of years ago, my husband, who was COO of the 3rd largest behavioral health business in the world, said, well, wait a second, how did I get here? I'm not corporate. I'm entrepreneurial, and it's time to jump off and do our own thing. And he was looking around for platforms, and in the end, we settled on this IOP business in Utah that had 4 locations already under its belt. It had been around for about 7 years. And the founders were fabulous at creating. I have to tell you how impressed I was with their curriculum that they have for this IOP. It is solidly grounded in research-backed CBT, DBT, resilience, Gottman, all of the things. And it is presented in a very accessible way that people of all walks of life and all ages can find, experience. So our groups are really a good amalgam of process and education. Educate, process that education, apply it to your own life, go back, educate, continue to apply, come back with results and talk about how that works. So anyway, IOP really, really appealed to us. And when he thought he would do this, I said, well, I'll market it for you. I've been a director of admissions and marketing in those many years in the past. And so we took the leap, and 6 months ago, Life Launch Centers became ours. We very quickly changed the name in an effort to increase accessibility to the anxiety, trauma, and depression treatment centers. And it's working. Our sign, we get calls because people see our sign.
Yeah.
In addition to finding us online or getting referrals from professionals, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
2 things. Tell me your husband's name.
His name is James Patrick Bailey.
James Bailey. I have a James, my youngest. I love it.
It's a good name.
And tell me the name of the business again.
It is the Anxiety, Trauma, and Depression Treatment Centers.
I love it. When we first saw that name appear, in the industry, it's so telling in terms of what's going on and the buzzwords and the topics and frankly the conditions, of our day. So It's brilliant. It's fantastic. Your family is all in.
100%.
This is all of your world. And when you came to our office at LÉVO and we visited, the day that you left, I remember thinking, there are not a lot of other families who are all in this. My wife and I are all in this. Yeah. She is an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist as well. And we own LÉVO. We spend every day, all day in it. So I'm curious, as as James was looking for a business and you said, okay, we're going to do this. You described, your mission before or at the beginning of this. Why this? Why are you all in on this? What is it about you and James and your hearts and your spiritual belief and whatever that is? Why this? Why are you all in on mental health?
Well, as I mentioned before, I worked in residential. I referred to residential. My husband ran residential programs, and there is a time and place for residential. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. However, IOP, intensive outpatient, for people who need more than 1 hour of therapy a week, but don't necessarily need to be in the hospital. Yeah. It called to us at this point in our lives because of the accessibility, because we are in network with every single insurance. So that makes it even more accessible. Yeah. And the ability to help people meet them where they are and help them confront whatever's going on in their lives, and at the same time prepare them, armor them up for whatever else is coming down the pipeline for them the rest of their lives. That called to us. And the passion that we had for residential has now moved over to, let's catch them before they have to get to residential. Yeah. Let's catch them at the time where they need it. And my goal, my personal dream is we plop one of these in every town of 100,000 or more across the country, because we know we would be busy all the time. People need this in today's world.
Let's give more context to that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. So this is why we're here, because as someone who is in the industry but meets with business owners and professionals, I sit with some of the leaders of the largest healthcare systems in Utah, for sure, the leaders of the mental health systems in Utah. There's a network group who spends time together. And you would think that because of the prevalence, every family has a mental health story. Everybody talking about it. Every company talks about it. I go to events where businesses are trying to figure it out because their people are missing tons of time away, right? It's impacting everything in society today. So you would think, well, if there's such a demand, you can meet the demand, right? There's tons of resources. And it's actually not true. So describe in the spectrum of, I went to the ER because I had to mental break, or because there was an overdose in my family, and so we ended up at the ER. Right. All the way to maybe the other end of the spectrum would be someone who goes to the gym to work out because they know that exercise and taking care of themselves is going to keep them on the proactive side of mental health. Right. So there's a lot in between. Where does IOP, or intensive outpatient, sit in the care spectrum?
That is so amazing that you think of that, because when I was doing consulting in residential, we frequently would talk about the spectrum of care. Yep. And the very bottom line, of course, is self-awareness, meditation, and then you get to once a week therapy. And then after once a week therapy, there's IOP, intensive outpatient, which is about 10 hours of therapy a week. In general, it changes from place to place. There are specializations that do different amounts of time. And then there's partial hospitalization, which is 6 to 8 hours a day. And then you get to hospitalization, or you go to wilderness programs, or you go to residential. And so that whole spectrum is there. IOP tends to be towards the bottom end. And the interesting thing that we love about IOP is you can step up to IOP or you can step down to IOP.
Describe that when you say bottom. Right? Yeah. Because listeners may be thinking, is the bottom does bottom mean you're at your, journeys, like meaning you have no more hope?
Oh,
like you're at the bottom? Like,
I should say that end of the spectrum, just opposite ends of the
just so
spectrum.
that people kind of understand that, because we use language, right? There's verbiage and there's a foreign language in mental health that most people who have never had a mental health challenge or a condition or issue, right? They have no idea the language of it. So what I have found as an owner and my wife being in it, you would think, again, because of the prevalence of the problems in society, that everybody knows exactly where to begin the journey, right?
Right.
When you have a physical symptom or you break your arm, everybody on the planet knows where you go in the US to get your broken arm fixed. But in mental health, a lot of people, in my opinion, the majority of families have no idea where to even begin. They hear about therapy, they hear about, well, he's in rehab.
Yeah.
And other than that, they don't even know what exists or how to begin. So if you don't mind, describe a little bit more plot on the spectrum, IOP, and why it's there, and maybe what's stepping down and stepping up, to use your terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So most people know I'm going to find my kid a therapist. If they're struggling, I'm going to get a therapist for them.
Yep.
They'll have somebody else to talk to. They'll teach them skills, etc. And occasionally that's just not enough. They're still struggling with persistent depressive, anxious, trauma-related problems. And once a week is band-aiding or pacifying the problem, but it's just not getting to the root. It's not helping them figure out how to live their lives. And for a lot of people, that is enough. But for those who it's not, the next step is IOP. It's intensive outpatient, where you do group work throughout the week, and you also have that individual session to do your one-on-one processing.
Yeah.
And so it is towards that lower end of the spectrum as far as amount of intervention goes. At the higher end of the spectrum, that's psychiatric hospitalization and things like that as far as intervention. And so IOP is beautiful because people can step up into it from a once-a-week therapy or no therapy, and it's accessible to them because of the language that we use that helps them understand themselves and what's going on inside of them. This is a good example up here on the wall. If I'm a clinician, I'm going to talk about cognitive distortions and cognitive dissonance and things like that. Instead, we're talking about stories in my head, and the emotion wheel. Where am I out here? And then back to, tracing it back to, this is the core emotion. And so that's one of the reasons that it's very accessible for people who are stepping up into it. It's also a really nice landing pad for people stepping down. And by that, I mean, they've been in a hospital, they've been in residential, they've been in a PHP, partial hospitalization. And the research shows, this is National Institute of Health research, shows that if you're going from a residential or a hospital setting to once-a-week therapy, you are 65% more likely to attempt suicide, 75% more likely to self-harm and need re-hospitalization. So this is a gap. And it's because they're coming from 24-hour-a-day support, monitoring, scaffolding.
Yeah,
and
a literal full team who is paid to support and be there and listen.
And keep you safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Safety. So keep going, because I'm glad you used the word safety, because there's safety around the clock. I feel good. The team has me and they're surrounding me. Then when I leave, you go from 24/7 to 1 hour, one time a week.
Exactly. And that's just too big a bounce.
Yep.
That's too big of a change. It feels like jumping off a cliff, falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that support. And that's one of the reasons IOP and PHP can be happening in there to help people. You can still go back to the therapist you were working with before. Let's add in these 3 group sessions a week where we're learning skills and applying them individually to our lives. And then have your individual with the person who's also working with you in group, who knows the things that you're learning. That gives you the scaffolding, as I mentioned, that's very fluid. If you're doing great, the scaffolding can kind of come down. If you're struggling, the scaffolding will ramp up around you.
That is my favorite word of the day. In fact, my kids keep saying, "Dad, you say scaffold way too much." But I love it, especially in the space that we're in, because, and I want to get your definition of this, but when I think about what is really going on from being in rehab or being 24/7 to scaffolding a life where you can function at a high level, that you can be present in your own life and happy and quote, be in recovery.
Yeah.
What is in that process that is going on? What is the scaffolding that you're talking about?
Okay, so I believe a good analogy would be somebody who is riding a bike with training wheels, and their parent is walking along with their hand on their shoulder and one hand on the steering wheel, the steering bar. That it would be residential. You're still making some effort because you're still pedaling. You still have to be present and aware so you don't run into a wall or into a ditch, those kind of things. IOP, PHP would be along the lines of we're taking those off, and at times the parent is going to have their hand on the handlebar. At times they're going to have the hand on the back. And at times they're going to be able to back off and let you go for a little bit. And when you fall and get some scrapes, they're going to be there helping you and helping you get back on the bike and keep going. And so I know that's a little bit of a loose metaphor, but the idea is you have a team of people who are all in for you. They're aware of what's going on in your life. They're aware of your struggles. They're trying to teach you the things that will help you be successful at managing your own life. And they're there to pick you up when you fall down as well.
The gap that you're talking about of maybe being in 24/7 rehab and being, functioning and kind of moving on with life, that the chance of jumping from one to the other in extremes, maybe the statistics, I'm sure that you do, but the likelihood of someone going back to rehab, if they don't have an intensive outpatient program or some sort of progression and scaffolding that you're talking about, isn't it 7 to 8 times people end up back in rehab? So is the reason that they do is because they don't have the scaffolding?
Yeah, it's too big of a change. You go from, I don't even really have to think for myself. They're bringing food to me. They're, giving me a schedule to go by. My parents come visit at certain times. Everything is done for me, out to the real world of I need to get up and go to school or work, and I need to fill my private time. And that's one of the things I love about our curriculum. Every week we go over a weekend plan. How are you going to manage yourself over the weekend when there's not very much structure? When life gets a little bit crazy? How are you going to make sure that you're keeping up your momentum over the weekend? And so that difficulty is there. Suddenly you do have to think for yourself. You do have to make those decisions, and you don't feel necessarily as surrounded by support and a bubble as you do in an inpatient setting.
That I'm just picturing in my head, in the last week, 5 to 10 people, families who I know who are in this world of addiction, suicide ideation, the stuff, right? The heavy stuff that is going on. And the hopelessness of individuals and families is that they don't know who has them.
Right.
So they kind of have an idea of where to begin. They may be looking at some of the options or those things, but the greatest fear of the parents who are going through it with the child who's struggling is they don't know the scaffolding that they all want it, and they want to invest, but they don't really know who's got me, who's my team, who's going to help me and our family put it all back together.
For sure.
And that gap of in treatment, the family's kind of like taking a breath. They're at least in a safe place.
Exactly.
But the idea of jumping to once a week therapy, I think they all know, like,
too much.
This is all consuming. This is a 24/7 problem, in this individual's life. And now we need help and a team and resources. So even hearing you say our team sits with someone and talks about a weekend plan, I can hear a mom or a dad going, thank God.
Right.
Like, that's a godsend.
And
to
we
a
have
family.
these parent groups too.
Totally.
Every other week or every week we bring the parents in. They can talk to each other about, the frustration and the difficulties that they're facing, share ideas for how to support each other. And we teach them what we're teaching the kids. And so they know what to expect of their child or what to remind their child to do for these coping mindfulness strategies that they've been learning. And so the parent groups are really indispensable as well. It helps the parents feel supported as well.
It's amazing. Can I just pause for a second?
For sure.
Not in recording, but I want to just take a sidestep because in the mental health space today, you have acute care, people who need care, right? I'm going to call it they're broken.
Right.
So they're in a bad spot. And then you have society going, how do we scaffold young people to have resilience, the ability to do the proactive things so they don't end up in rehab or IOP, all of the system, right, of mental health care. Do you think that the same tools that IOP is really teaching and scaffolding for people who are in a tough spot, those are all the same tools and strategies, don't you believe, they're going to help everybody in the proactive?
It's funny you mentioned
part of
that.
What, like in my head, everybody should be going through.
It's really true.
Even if they're not addicted or dealing with suicide, like these are still the same tools that everybody who's not in it
can help you live a joyful, contented, peaceful life. Absolutely. And, you know, we just barely opened up groups for adults. We're talking 30 on the way up. Our oldest is 72. Our youngest is 36 in the group right now. And they...
Not because they're broken.
Not because they're
just
broken.
Just because they want proactive, better tools.
Because they want proactive, better tools. And also, the older they are, the more life they've experienced. And so they have many more clear-cut, big T traumas, so to speak, you know, deaths and loss and things like that. And so they're coming to this group and they're finding a community.
Yeah.
And they're finding skills that were never taught in school or in home.
So when you describe you and your husband want to build one of these centers in every community that has 100,000 or more people, I now get that.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me because I think that every family at some point is going to need to have a mental health gym.
Oh, that's a great way to
whatever the, you know, the local LA fitness, like whatever that is, that makes sense to me because this problem is not going away. It's going to continue to be pervasive. And I'm just picturing that in my head, how hopeful that would provide communities to know there are organizations that exist for the proactive side. Yeah. You know, to be taught by experts and professionals these types of tools. So anyway, I know that's a sidebar, but I think all the time, you know, if we as mental health professionals and business owners, if we really wanted to put ourselves out of business, we would do what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I've always said that. I would love to not be needed. Yeah. I would love for my job to go the way of travel agents and, you know, that kind of thing. The bottom line is, though, and I noticed this, I was towards the beginning of my career in 2008 when we had the recession, and everybody was talking about, oh no, what's going to happen? And I had my most profitable year. I'm in a growth industry. You know, when things get bad, things happen. And that's exactly why I'm in this field, is because bad things are not going to stop happening. Yeah. That's life.
It is life.
And no matter how happy and well-adjusted we all are, car accidents still happen. Illness still happens. You know, chemical imbalances still happen. Yeah. And we can learn how to adjust our sails and you know, sail in that storm.
Wouldn't it be nice to be needed and do well, you know, as a profession and yet have less pain and sorrow?
I would love it. I would love
it. The proactive
it.
side of it would be an awesome.
I would love to be phased out.
It's not going to happen.
No.
You know, it's not going to happen. But so I want you to spend some time talking about trauma. Define it. Talk about why you've chosen that path and what role does trauma play? I'm coming down here today. I have to admit, you know, I was thinking about trauma because in my own life, some of the most traumatic experience that I had, I've not gone to war. I've not been abused. I have not dealt with, you know, the things that we normally associate trauma with. But as I've learned in my own life, the traumatic experiences that I've had in school, struggling with ADHD, struggling with all the stuff, dyslexia in my life, those things have become the greatest blessing for me to be resilient, to learn the tools to face hard stuff. So what's the difference between trauma that serves us and trauma that crushes us?
That is a really unique perspective to ask about. First of all, let me step back and just talk about trauma.
Yeah.
How trauma happens. So we go through our lives every day. We live our lives. Things happen. We go to school, work, eat, family, friends, whatever. Every night while we're sleeping, our brains review the day, chop up everything that happened, process it, and move it from short-term to long-term memory. And that's all it is. Our dreams are literally brain poop. It's just the after effect of our brain reviewing the day and moving it to long-term memory. The only problem is when something frightening, threatening, terrifying, hurtful, abusive, rejecting happens, that's like a lump of bad meat.
Shame and embarrassment?
Shame and embarrassment.
Okay.
Yeah. That's like a lump of bad meat, and our brain can't chew it up and it can't move it to long-term memory. So it's sitting in our short-term memory. It's just sitting there right in the middle of our brain, and it's painful. It hurts to look at, to think about, to touch. We don't want to. And so every human who's ever lived on the face of the earth builds a wall, metaphorically, down their brain and throws that lump on the other side of the wall. Some of us, I would say the Brits, probably, because I'm half British, paint that wall to look like the opposite side of our brain. Go that far just to pretend. Keep calm and carry on. Nothing bad has happened. And that's okay. It's a good short-term strategy. The only problem is that every single one of those lumps represents a trigger that we don't even realize we have. So if something bad happens to you and you don't have the same lump in your brain that I do, you're going to react about this much. It's painful. That's it. And you're going to get over it. But because I have that lump, I'm going to react like this. I'm going to be triggered. And I'm going to probably make some decisions that are not going to bring me the results that I would normally enjoy. And that's a problem. And so over life, as we live our lives, because everybody has those lumps, they build up. And we end up living a reactive life. We're reacting to the tough stuff that's happened in our past. That affects our relationships, who we get into relationships with and how we interact in those relationships. It affects our career or educational goals.
Yeah.
It affects our risk-taking, how we react when other people come to us with feedback, either constructive or otherwise. We are reacting. We're slaves to our past trauma. And that's one of the reasons that I went into trauma, is because after working in this field for a couple of decades and working with thousands of individuals, came to the conclusion that it's the trauma. It's the trauma that's holding us back. You look at other diagnoses, depression and anxiety, those are actually symptoms of PTSD. Avoidance, reactivity, isolation, all of those things that describe or are the diagnostic criteria for depression and anxiety are actually the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress. And so I see stress and trauma as being at the root of pretty much everything we're doing, all of the dysfunction in our lives. And we talk about big T trauma versus little t trauma, and that's kind of an insider thing. Big T trauma is the big stuff. And trust me, I've worked with 13-year-olds who've been gang raped, or 14-year-olds whose houses exploded, or 15-year-olds who watched their parents die from the back seat of a car in a car accident. I've worked with it all. And it seems insurmountable. Those are kind of the big T traumas. But you'd be surprised. I have people coming to me, especially in this area, who say, I don't know why I'm depressed. I never had anything bad happen to me. And then we talk about their childhood, and we talk about, elementary school in the first few grades when they didn't feel like they belonged. They got excluded, or even went as far as being bullied. But that was second or third grade. That's nothing. That doesn't matter to me now. Those lumps are there, and you're living your life like a bullied kid.
Yeah.
Or somebody who doesn't belong. And trauma can be something that traumatizes one person isn't going to traumatize another, because we all have differing levels of internal ability and resilience. And so trauma can be as small as a shy, introverted kid born into a very extroverted, politically active family. They don't fit, right? And they're constantly being pushed and have expectations made on them that are very, very uncomfortable. That's trauma for that kid. As much as it's trauma for a kid to have a parent die, or to be abused or exploited or neglected, all of those things. And I got to tell you, some of the most resistant cases that were hardest to treat weren't any active trauma. It was neglect by a parent who was struggling with their own deep depression. And the depression created this neglect for this child who now is a young adult or an adult. And it has shaped their lives to the extent that it's very, very retractable. It's very hard to treat. And so we talk about big T trauma, we talk about little t trauma. Everybody's got it. And it doesn't matter if your trauma is big T to you, but little t to somebody else.
Yeah.
Like you said, you haven't been through a war. And I heard somebody recently joking around kind of morbidly saying, that's what we need. The youth of today, we need a war. They need to go through tough stuff and realize they can do more than they think they can do because of many different reasons. There's an excellent book called The Anxious Generation that shows lots and lots of research. I have it right over there about why today's generation is in constant high alert, constant crisis. So to the point where they don't feel safe, and any bump that comes down their road, it feels like their whole life is over. And they don't have that resilience, that grit that we talk about people needing. The confidence, the self-efficacy to believe that this is a bad thing that's happened in my life. I know I can deal with it. I know I'll get through it, and the sun will come again and I'll be okay. And that's missing in a lot of our kids today. And a lot of that has to do with electronics and social media and the isolation. And it was already there. And then COVID just impacted it. It just exponentially impacted it. So we have a generation of people today, the young people, who need to be in a room together, being vulnerable and discussing difficult topics for the first time in their lives. And then we have our young adults who are the same thing. And then we have our older adults. And by older, I mean 27 and older, who have really been in that big T trauma camp and who really need these skills to be able to manage what life has thrown at them.
Go back, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
It's brilliant. There's so much good there to use an industry term to unpack.
Yes.
So go back to, you used a couple terms there. One of them was root cause, and then you described a lot of trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma. When you think through the mental health conditions, right? Anxiety, depression, ADHD, OCD, bipolar, right? The things that an individual may be diagnosed with tend to be the symptoms, right? Describe what that condition is, or in the DSM, which is the Bible, of the mental health space, describing all the different mental health conditions and the research, that backs each of them. But oftentimes those conditions are, they are the symptom descriptors of what's going on. They're anxious or they are depressed. But you describe trauma being linked to how much of them, how much percentage-wise are the mental health conditions of the day, how much is trauma linked to most of them?
It's funny, as a side joke, I have a sister-in-law who was a police officer for 30 years. And once upon a time, I jokingly asked her, what would happen to your job if there were no alcohol or drugs or anything in the world? What would happen to crime? She said, 90% gone. I said, just from alcohol and drugs? She said, yep. 90% fewer crime if we didn't have those. And I kind of feel like trauma is the same thing. We talk about substance use disorders. Nobody gets into drugs and alcohol because their life is wonderful. They use it to cope with difficulty, whether that's shyness or difficult things that are going on in their lives. They can't face it, that kind of stuff. So substance abuse has long been recognized as a symptom of something else. The only problem is that it's addictive, and you have to take care of that before you can get to. Same with eating disorder. Eating disorder is a symptom of something else, but it's life-threatening. So you have to take care of the eating disorder and get it in line before you can get here. And that's why there are specialized IOPs for eating disorder and for substance use. And those are rule outs for us, is a primary eating disorder, active eating disorder, or active substance use, because they need specialized help to get those under control so they can come here and work on, as I said, the root cause. When we look at classic child development forms, trust versus mistrust, and we're learning that in our first couple of years. If we have neglectful parents or traumatic things happening, obviously we're going to learn mistrust. Flash forward 15, 20 years, you have somebody who learned mistrust in their childhood because of trauma in their childhood. How are they going to be reacting in relationships with a coworker or a roommate or a neighbor or a romantic partner? They're not going to be functioning the way that somebody who didn't go through that would.
Yeah.
And those reactive attachment disorder things that we talk about, when we talk about the Russian babies that come over and they're trying to murder their adoptive parents, that's because warmth and love is foreign and threatening to them because they were raised without it. So it's so foreign. And that wouldn't have happened to them if they had grown up without trauma in their childhood.
Yeah.
So when I talk about root cause, trauma is the thing that separates us from health. And the depression, the anxiety, the bipolar, the substance use, the eating disorder, the OCD, these are the symptoms of the trauma.
So good. And I'm gonna just restate it so that people, whatever audience
as many
this ends
different
up
ways
in,
but
we
I
have
agree.
to say it over and over and connect the dots to most people, because teens don't seek out drugs and alcohol thinking they are attracted to drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
Something is hurting in them, and their brain is saying, make it go away.
Mm-hmm.
Find a way to get out of this
Avoid.
pain and sorrow and do something with this. And so, I mean, I was raised in Utah. I was raised in LDS culture, and I was raised with, often a discussion around drugs and alcohol being this thing and stay away from it because it's addictive. But I want people to connect the dots with you being the expert that, well, why do they seek it in the first place?
Yes.
Not because, I don't know, maybe they saw an ad and it looked cool, but it resonates with them if they're struggling with trauma or
there's some lack. If I don't feel up to snuff socially, I know plenty of people who started drinking because I'm fun and I'm outgoing and I'm friendly when I'm intoxicated, but I'm shy and awkward when I'm not. I know plenty of people who did that, or to get along with the people that they see as, I need to be popular with these people and this is what they do, so I'm going to do it too. Only somehow they're able to keep it casual and I fall into a full addiction because of that. It's masking lacks, a lack of whatever it is.
Having a hard time living with your own thoughts and living in your own skin. I mean, as a teenager, drugs and alcohol were attractive to me, not because I wanted drugs and alcohol and all the mess that came from that.
Right.
Even the shame, because my religion said those are really bad, stay away from them. Yet why did I still want them? Because I did not want to live with my brain racing from ADHD.
Exactly.
And I didn't want the shame of going to school and not being able to learn. I wanted to feel different, and that felt like one avenue of trying to feel different. Just like different friends, just like, so really what's happening is coping. People who are attracted to things that are not good for them are attracted because they're trying to cope with trauma
it's
or
anywhere
a
but
stressor.
here, anywhere but in my mind. I want to be somewhere else that I'm not feeling or thinking the things that I'm thinking. And, I had a very different upbringing. I grew up in Southern California and drugs and alcohol were everywhere. And it never occurred to me to try it. And I didn't have friends of my own religion who had the same thing, but I had friends who were going places in life and they weren't going to get mixed up in stuff that was going to slow them down. They didn't have that trauma that led them to feel that lack of whatever I need to make up for inside of me or escape with it inside of me. And so I didn't get into it. My friends didn't get into it. It just wasn't something that interested us. It wasn't attractive on any level. Because growing up in the 80s, you're seeing very clearly what's happening.
For sure. So just to kind of restate that though, if parents are listening and you have a child or a teen who is getting into drugs and alcohol, or they are looking for these, resources that you're nervous about or that you feel like are dangerous as a parent, the questions you should be asking are,
what's going on? Talk to me about your friends. Tell me what was the best thing that happened today and also the worst thing that happened today. Teenagers need that connection. It's difficult because they also want to be, it's their developmental need to be independent and to start separating themselves from the family blob and be independent people in the world and see who they are. And they still need that connection, but they need it on a different level than they do when they're kids. And that's why I coach parents to do what I call drive-by parenting with kids when they're teenagers. When they don't want a hug and a kiss, you walk by and you ruffle their hair and they'll push your hand away, but you're already walking away, and so they can't touch it. You walk by and you pat them on the back or you sock them in the arm.
I love the drive-by parenting.
Yeah, drive-by parenting where you're in the car and you might have headphones in, but you might very loudly say to your spouse or your partner, you know what I like about Craig? He's really creative. He figures out how to do things. Even when he's figuring out how to get around us and our rules, he's very creative. You know, you talk about things you like about that person because teenagers know you love them. They need to know you like them too. And that's part of it's not just, what do I ask my teens? It is, how do I interact with my teens? So good.
Because I love my kids, but I don't like them 5 out of the 7 days a week, right?
For sure. Yeah, and when I'm starting with a new client, I do a genogram. I put their whole family on here and I say, okay, who on here do you love but don't like? And they'll tell me very clearly who I love them, but don't want to spend time with them, you know? And that's a very real thing. And it's just a fact of life. And teenagers are going through that in a very, very clear way. And so when you're parenting a teen, you have to parent them very differently than you do when they're little. I've got a 21-year-old and I've got an 8-year-old. Totally different ways of parenting.
So different. For sure.
Yeah, because the 21-year-old, he's on his own. He's going to be facing his choices. He gets to make his choices, and I rejoice in the fact that he is living out of our home, having an adult experience, and facing the world on his own. And he can still come home. He still has a room at our house. He'll come crash at our house or do laundry or whatever, all the typical, stereotypical things that the young adults will do. But he still is in his band and is working and doing his things. And I love that. And when he has problems, he'll come talk to us about them. And that's the most important thing to me, is that he knows no matter what, he has unconditional positive regard. Even, in the days in the past when he's acted nasty, he needs to know those are the days when you walk by and ruffle their hair and say, boy, I love you. And they'll bat you away, but you're already gone. So you got that in. Mm-hmm.
What is... I'm just picturing again parents and kind of watching teens and trying to just observe, what's going on with their teenagers. What is the right amount of allowing space for curiosity growing up? Like just learning because you're curious about stuff versus I think they're coping with something.
That is a very fine line.
Yeah. I mean, it was in my own development as I look back. I mean, are those even the right terms to use? I
think that's getting closer to it. The idea of I'm experimenting because I'm my own person and I want to see how I interact with the world and everything in the world, versus I'm doing it because I'm trying to escape feelings or thoughts or who I am, or that self-perceived lack of who I am. And I don't know, it sounds like I should be asking you that question.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that is that in my own experience as a teen growing up, and then as I have parented, there's a certain amount of positive experience just coming from, well, I tried it and it was not a good outcome or a bad outcome, or just being curious about life. I think that there's a lot of parents who struggle with, well, I believe my child or teen is addicted to pornography, or they're struggling with social media and they literally cannot put down their phone.
Right.
Well, to use your term earlier, how do you scaffold life experience from just being curious versus curiosity took them into something and now it's become a problem?
Right, because of an addictive nature.
Yeah, they're now coping with stressors at school, so they check out by scrolling on social media for 9 hours until midnight every night.
Right, which quadrupled the rate of suicidal thinking in young women and adolescents from 2008 to 2018.
Yeah.
The scrolling, the constant comparisons. It's almost too late. I mean, I hate to say too late. There's got to be a lot of repair when you get to that point, when people are deep into whatever addiction it is. And lots of times you don't even know until your kid finally gets to a point where they're so miserable that they'll admit to you that there's a problem. It's deep in things like interaction. it is creating more chances to have them do things in real life than they have to sit on their phone.
Yeah.
So that they start choosing life instead of their phone. And that's going to take some concerted effort on the part of parents and other loving adults in their world. And talking with them very frankly about limits and helping them to impose their own limits, including them in the solution, helping them understand that it is a problem, even if they're not at that point where they understand that it's a problem, and then helping include them. How are you going to stay busy and do things, what are your interests? How can we support you? If it's fencing, or if it's horseback riding, or if it's library, or if it's, running, it's something that's not online, and it needs to be something. So figure it out and we will support you, that kind of a thing.
Is that process, and is the IOP scaffolding that you referenced earlier, when you really kind of think of the core of what's going on, is it scaffolding self-discipline? The ability to govern self? Is that the best outcome, is that people are capable of being disciplined in their own lives, control their, I wouldn't say control thoughts, but they can manage their own thoughts, let them come, know how to coach them away, know how to coach their own behavior.
Exactly. Well, and I love how you put that. It's self-discipline. It's figuring out how to manage yourself and how to not react to all the stuff that's happened in your life, to be able to metabolize it, move it from short to long-term memory, and say, that's something that happened. And I don't have any more distress thinking about it than the first time I tried a grapefruit when I was a kid, or a pickle, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love how you talk about that. The scaffolding is for you to practice in a safe environment, exercising your own agency, exercising your own ability to make choices for yourself and learn from the consequences of your choices.
Yeah.
A lot of the reason that we're in the problem that we're in today is because of the pervasive ideas on parenting and shielding children from the consequences of their own choices. And if they learn those consequences in third grade, that I'm not going to bug the biggest kid on the playground by getting slapped around or shoved down, I'm not going to get shot at a party when I'm 18 because I'm mouthing off to a gang member. The price tag is much lower when you start earlier. And so that's a lot of what we're looking for, is helping people learn to make those decisions for themselves, and also have the confidence that when I do make a decision that brings consequences I don't like, I can get through it. I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to live to fight another day. I can get through this.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you describe that. I was taught to keep a journal when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, I hated school. I struggled in school. But for whatever reason, I took to writing. I think it was my way of kind of getting feelings out when, I was growing up. I didn't have a family who spoke in meaningful dialogue a lot. Mm-hmm. Amazing people, awesome people. But we just didn't speak openly about thoughts and feelings and what was going on in our life. Well, one of my journal entries from my teenage years, I said something to the effect of, I'm not good at making choices. I always make the wrong one. Just kind of interesting to think through. You describe choices and having an environment that is safe to become good at making your own choices. So, it struck something in me because of my own journey, but I also see it around me often, that a lot of my own friends, peers, couples, other, husbands and wives who are trying to raise children and teens, they're so fearful of wrong decision making that they, in my opinion, they helicopter parent or they smother, right? Because they're so scared of their kids, whatever, name 10 fears that they may have. So they smother choice making in an effort to keep safe. And there's a negative implication of that, because then they become adults. They may hit 18 and go serve an LDS mission. And the first 2 months, all of a sudden, right?
Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing.
I've never made my decisions.
And my anxiety is sky high because I don't have a helicopter choosing everything for me.
Yeah.
That is a huge
My
part.
safety net is now gone.
Mhm,
Will you
mhm.
just speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I get reminded of it pretty regularly by my 8-year-old daughter, who I say, "You're not going to want to go to school in that today, hun. It's snowing today, and that shorts outfit that you've got going on, you're going to be cold." And there may be some raised voices when she responds with, "It's my choice, and you said I can choose what I want to wear." I'm like, you know what? You're right. I apologize. And, I'm a wear it or carry it coat kind of mom.
Right.
You wear it or you carry it. She now doesn't fight me anymore. She's just, okay. And she'll tie it around her waist or stuff it in her backpack. I don't care. If she's smart and she's cold, she's going to put it on. But she'll be the first one to rattle off, "It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it." And she'll preach it too. She's a preachy little 8-year-old.
Yeah.
The whole idea is when we shield kids from consequences, they don't have a real experience. That is a faux experience of life, because life is full of natural consequences. And so when we don't allow our children, because we don't like seeing them in pain, we don't like how it reflects on our family, we don't like how it makes us look or how they look. We want to save them being bullied, or make sure they're in with the in kids. We're reacting to our own stuff from our own high school days, for whatever reason. When we shelter kids from consequences, we are actively teaching them falsehood, which is there aren't consequences. That's number one. We're actively teaching them a falsehood, that there aren't consequences. And that includes a certain amount of entitlement there to be able to dodge consequences.
Yeah.
But the most insidious part of it is between the lines, we're telling them, you can't think for yourself. You don't know how to analyze situations and make an educated decision. You don't know how to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And that is the most insidious thing. And that's what we see in 18 and 19-year-olds when they leave home for the first time and crumble, is because they don't know. They don't know how to make those decisions. And it's so foreign and it's so uncomfortable. And they get paralyzed because they're so anxious about making the right decision. And so our kids need more opportunities to make decisions. And can I just say also, put my plug in for teenagers and adolescents, you are never going to win as a parent if you try to control their music, their appearance, or their friends. You're never going to be able to control that. So don't even try. Don't make it a power struggle, because you will always lose. So let those things go and focus on the most important things. Are you honest? Do you have integrity? Do you show respect for people who need respect?
When you think through what you just described, when a child now grows up, they become the 18, 19-year-old, they may go off to school, they may serve an LDS mission, whatever it is that is post high school, if they have not scaffolded self-discipline, right? We talked about trauma. We talked about people who are dealing with addiction and trying to get on with their life. We're now talking about teens who don't have any of that, but in a way, are they still lacking the same thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when I talk to parents, we always talk about protecting your kids' agency until they have enough wherewithal to be able to exercise it in the best way for themselves.
Yeah.
And so when kids are, single digit age, of course, we're going to protect them. We're going to protect them from predators of all kinds and from bad experiences. And hopefully we're educating them as to why we're making these decisions. Because as they get to the teenage years, hopefully this very strict situation needs to start opening up and needs to start giving them more and more and more control over the things that really don't matter. Their appearance, their friends, that kind of stuff. They need to have those interactions. And yes, they're going to get their heart broken. Yes, they're going to be embarrassed or feel some shame in certain situations. But hopefully we've raised them to be able to bounce back from that.
Yeah.
And to say, well, that was what I did that day and it wasn't such a great thing. I'm not a bad person. I just made a dumb mistake. And I can do better in the future.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going. But the whole idea is, unless you're raised by a pack of wolves, you're going to have parents who care about you for the most part and try to control your life. But as soon as those teenage years hit, probably sooner, we need to start giving them some control. We need to start giving them some control. That has some natural consequences. I'll let my daughter eat as much sugar as she wants, and she has learned I feel horrible when I eat too much. Or if I eat it within a couple of hours of bed, I run a marathon in my sleep She knows this about herself. And so now she'll say, Mom, can I have a Kinder Egg? And I'll say, what time is it? And she'll say, oh, it's only an hour before bed. I'm not going to do that. Because I let her have all the sugar she wants, and she knows how bad it feels.
Yeah, cause and effect.
Right.
There's something to what you're describing, and this is why driving here to visit with you, I wanted to dive into, right, the brokenness of trauma and the implications of it on mental health conditions where people now have to overcome that they're in a bad way. They're in a bad spot in life. Trauma got them there. They're now dealing with the symptoms of, the whatever that trauma is, versus children who have not been in traumatic experiences, and yet they're still in a similar situation, not because of necessarily big T, capital T trauma, but maybe the little t trauma is they have not been allowed. They are living a life, they are breathing, they're going to school, they're involved, but
they're checking all the boxes.
Yeah, they're checking the boxes. They are alive, but they don't have the tools either to cope with being alive.
Right.
And in my head, I'm thinking how ironic that, one family is just dealing with, the fact that their child eventually probably is going to struggle because they have not scaffolded the self-discipline in the same way that someone who may be going through rehab or getting out of rehab, they have not scaffolded the self-discipline.
It's really true. And the bottom line is no one avoids trauma. No one goes through life. And those people who, my husband and I frequently talk about this, we're both really grateful we had our trauma in our earlier years and got together after most of it was done. Because these people who don't have much trauma, they get
trauma
to their 30s,
bonded.
40, we trauma bonded.
Oh,
no, we're basically a male and female version of the same person. So we're grateful that happened in our lives, because we see these people who've had a golden roller coaster life up until their 20s, 30s, 40s. And life happens because it's going to happen sooner or later. It's going to happen. And they don't know any different. And they don't have that confidence in themselves to be able to deal with hard things. And so suddenly they're having an identity crisis on top of all the repercussions of whatever negative is happening in their life.
Yeah.
And so, trauma happens. We've got to learn to roll with it, because everybody's got their stuff. I've been saying that for 30 years now. Everybody's got their stuff. Whether you can see it or not, everybody's got their stuff. And stuff really is trauma. It's difficult things that you've been through. Have you been able to work through it and make it work for you and inform you and make you compassionate and empathetic and able to come from a place of understanding and warmth to lift other people? Or is it holding you back? And are you feeling like you shouldn't be alive because of this trauma? And those are two very different states of being.
Yeah.
And you can get from one up to the compassionate level by doing the work you need to do. And so 1 in every town of 100,000, really, I think this should be taught in every elementary school in America. The resilience model needs to be taught in every elementary, in middle and high and college and that kind of stuff. One of our therapists that we got who does some of our virtual groups was already teaching a resilience class for the virtual university that she worked for 7 years. And so when she came to our curriculum, she said, I've been doing this, but this is so much better. So there are some universities out there that are recognizing that these young people, and people of all ages, frankly, because people of all ages are going to school, are needing this information about how to be resilient, how to metabolize life, and emerge stronger and more confident. And so it's not just us. There's a movement in our world today. For sure.
It's talked about everywhere. If you were to say, what are the top 3 things on the resilience curriculum? What would they be?
Self-compassion, self-understanding, and self-confidence. I don't know. I would say they're up on here, really. It shows a lot of what we do. The self-understanding really does understand how your brain is structured and how it works, how it does get hijacked, how logic and emotion are on a seesaw. As one goes up, the other one goes down. And as we're getting more anxious or more depressed, that means logic is going all the way down and we're not thinking clearly. I think that's one of the most important things every human being can understand is I need to check my emotions and bring logic back into it so that I can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
Because all logic or all emotion is not effective.
How important is self-awareness
Oh my
to
goodness.
all of it?
Oh my goodness. If you're not self-aware, if you're not aware of the decisions you're making, the thoughts you're having in your head that lead to the decisions, then we're not able to make those changes that we need to make, or learn the things we need to learn, or apply the things we need to apply. So self-awareness, that feedback that we have with the entire world of I put this out, what comes back, is integral to being able to make changes.
My wife and I have seen in our own mental health story and journey since we were newlyweds, what we brought to the marriage, and then, what collectively, our traumas became together. That self-awareness was fundamental, because if you're just reacting to the emotion or the events of the day, and you're not necessarily self-aware, you're going to default to your coping tools that you either do or don't have.
And your defense mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if you have not scaffolded that self-discipline, and part of the discipline being self-awareness, then, my day used to look like I'm stressed at work building companies. So what's my default? Well, my default coping mechanism was I'm going to eat a lot. So I ate a lot. Why? Because that's how I did it as a kid. Like, you just eat your feelings. And so until we became self-aware of just, I'm feeling stressed. What do I want to do? I want to eat.
Right.
Like, Utah's awesome. Like the sugar, culture is amazing here.
Oh boy.
Everybody's eating their feelings, and, sugar and soda is like a big deal. But what I need is self-awareness enough to say, I need to go walk for 10 minutes outside in the sun. I need to feel some serotonin so that the coping, becomes productive versus,
reactive.
unproductive or reactive.
Yeah.
Say more about, to finish up, what are you seeing going on in society? What's in your heart, mind, expertise, in terms of what you're doing here, and what hope would you give families?
Goodness, that is a very run-on question. I don't know.
It is.
What I see in the world today is more of social media, of technology, of AI, headlong running into it without thinking about the consequences. And then I see this minority over here, this very vocal minority saying, wait, that's not good. We're going to have consequences that we can't live with later on. This minority is starting to grow in awareness. It's getting a foothold in society. I have never worked with an individual who was experiencing depression and anxiety who, when they got off of all social media, their anxiety and depression didn't plummet, like decrease to an alarming degree. I mean, just a shocking amount of decrease of depression and anxiety. So that's anecdotal from personal practice.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do here is help people live, help them understand life is here, it's worth living. Bad things happen, and that's life. It's not your favorite day, but it's not the end.
Yeah.
And I can pick up and I can have other good days afterwards. And the curriculum we have is fantastic at helping people understand how to do that, understand how their brain works, how their mind works, how their personality works, and how to implement some tools and have a pack of tools that they can pull out whenever they need them, wherever they are, to stop a panic attack, to stop those negative thoughts that lead to the panic attack. You go further and further. And as soon I can even avoid the situations that are unhealthy that might lead to those thoughts, which lead to the panic attack. So it's all about self-awareness. It's all about learning the skills that work for you, and we're here to teach them to you.
It's awesome. What an incredible resource. How do you make it attractive for people to want to come? And what resources do you need to do it? Meaning, does insurance get involved? I mean, we kind of get couched, right, in this is healthcare, and healthcare in the U.S. means, well, who's going to pay for it? Is my health insurance going to pay? So talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so one of the reasons that we were very attracted to this company is the founders were just brainiacs about getting in network with everyone. And that's very attractive to us as we're thinking about accessibility to the masses. Unfortunately, some people have very, very high deductibles, And that becomes prohibitive. But I'll tell you, every single one of them, we want people to get the help they need. We will work with them to figure out what they can afford. And we will go with that because we want them to get the help they need. We work with everybody who needs that. Number one, that's insurance. What do you need to get into this is an awareness. And that's kind of our goal right now, is a public awareness campaign to help people understand IOP exists and it's accessible and it really helps. And I'll tell you, I just did an assessment with a young lady the other day who was 14, who had already been inpatient in years past. And she's struggling with some depression and anxiety. And she told me, I'm begging for IOP. And I said, tell me about that. Why are you begging? She said, because the hospital's fine, but IOP is supportive. I think I'm going to get the support I need here. And it doesn't have the impact or the difficulty when you leave it like the hospital does. And so I've had 2 or 3 adolescents and young adults in the last week tell me that very thing. I want IOP. Please get me into this.
Does it feel less of a stigma as well? Meaning the hospital seems, I was really, really broken, or I was really, really sick. Whereas if I come to this cool office, and do you know what I mean? Just
and have these yummy snacks and hang out.
Yeah, like ping pong. Like it just, there's a cool factor that maybe feels, I don't know, I'm not as broken. I'm not as...
I don't know. I'm going to stop you there because I've always joked around, at least for the last decade or so, you're nobody if you don't have at least one therapist. So our culture today among the youth is, oh, I see my therapist on this day and going to the hospital, whatever. I don't know that there's very much stigma attached to it. It just, I believe it's what it says about yourself and your self-concept.
Right.
This is something I can do, and I can do it for myself to be okay. This is self-care. And going to the hospital, I'm going to get medicine and people are going to babysit me. And that's going to feel nice. I won't have to think for myself for a while, but afterwards it's going to feel a lot worse.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's necessarily stigma as much as there is that is going to hurt worse later. And this is going to feel okay while I'm doing it. It might be inconvenient, but I'm going to commit to it and I'm going to do it.
In my head, when I'm thinking about speaking to my children, like if my children needed the resources, which they all do at varying levels, but the ability to communicate and say to my kids, even the language I use, hey, I love you. We need to take you to the hospital. That feels different than I love you. We have been looking for tools and resources, and there's coaching with this organization. Right? Just even how you kind of couch it, and like, how does it feel, and where do you go that may allow the individual to arrive and to be vested in it versus pushing away at it.
Right.
Right. And earlier you described trauma. I've had multiple surgeries, 4 knee surgeries, back surgery. When I go to the hospital, I know I need to get fixed. But to say that getting surgery isn't traumatic, it's freaking scary.
Yeah.
And I love the outcome.
It's literally going under the knife.
So I'm not anti-hospital or inpatient either, or rehab. All of it is important in the spectrum.
And it's amazing that it exists.
100%.
When it's needed.
100%.
That if we're looking for these resources for you to be able to bulk up, get to fighting weight emotionally.
Yeah.
That can, hopefully you're not going to get to that, we love you and we're going to take you to the hospital.
Yeah.
This can preempt that if you start a little bit sooner, hopefully.
Yeah. What's unique for me in the industry is that the people, the men and women who are running the hospitals, behavioral health hospitals, they're incredible humans.
They are.
And
their heart is in the right place.
And who they're helping is the right people. But if you sat with them, they would say, there's a lot of people who end up here who don't need to be here. But because society either knows hospital or therapy,
exactly,
they don't know anything in between. That tends to be where people end up first.
I was down at the big hospital in St. George a couple of weeks ago, and I went into the ER, and the doc said, yes, we get 10 a week. And it fills up the ER when we have people coming in bleeding that we need to help from accidents, when we could send them your way. And that's exactly what we're looking for, is for people to be able to find the less invasive option that's going to give them the better yield, which is confidence, self-awareness, my ability to handle difficult things.
Yeah, I love that. I'm picturing hundreds and hundreds of therapists who are getting texts and phone calls, and people are saying, we just learned last weekend my son or daughter has been, abusing drugs, whatever it may be. And that population of therapists saying, you need to find Margaret. You need, right, this middle ground instead of, and I know that there are therapists taking calls who are hearing my daughter tried to take her life last weekend. Right? What does that, in your opinion, where should that therapist be referring? Is it to a hospital? Is it to you all?
There is no clear-cut answer on that. If someone is, so the secret that most people don't know is that most suicidal crises do not last longer than 6 hours. If you can get through those 6 hours and then get some help, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so in general, like I said, there's no one size fits all answer to that question, because you have to judge acuity. You have to judge the resources available, internal and external, to that person. But I have to tell you, when I was in private practice for a decade, I would have loved to have had an IOP in my town, because there were plenty of people coming to me who needed more than 1 or 2 hours a week of therapy. And I wasn't about to say, go to residential. The family couldn't afford it. Insurance wouldn't pay for it, all of those things. So we were trying to cobble together a scaffolding for them, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And as an outpatient therapist, I wasn't worried about my income and losing these people to IOP. I knew that when they were done, they'd come back to me.
Yeah.
And I knew that these spots would be filled by all these other people who needed therapy. And so, that's my perspective as an outpatient therapist. And we certainly, we venerate the clinical population. The community that we have around here, especially in Davis County, is very good. There is a really strong level of support at the outpatient clinical level.
Yeah.
This is something that's been missing, and we're really glad to bring it here and throughout the state. And it's just another level of care. And some people are going to benefit more from weekly therapy. Some people are going to benefit from 10 hours a week of therapy.
Yeah.
And some people, just for whatever reason, are going to need residential or hospitalization. And that's okay.
Yep.
I'm just grateful that we have all of these options now.
It is okay. And I want to just add my voice to that, just to reiterate that if your child is in distress, or if you are in distress, your appetite and desire for more, I want to work on this more.
Yeah.
And the therapist is saying, see you in a week.
Yeah.
And that feels like that's not safe to you. IOP is your people. This is where you should spend the time. The outpatient therapist, 1 time a week, understand that they themselves as a professional, they can only be reimbursed once a week.
Yeah.
Insurance doesn't allow you to see them, even if their practice did it. So, they may be able to pay cash for those visits, but this is that space. Just, if you need more safety and help and support from a mental health professional more than once a week for an hour, IOP is the term.
It is.
Just learn it, know it,
It
understand it.
Yeah.
Look for what? What website? How can they find you?
We are at atdtreatment.com. So that stands for anxiety, trauma, and depression. You can also spell out anxiety, trauma, depression, treatment.com, but it's easy to do ATD because we shot ourselves in the foot with our long name. We just felt very strongly about identifying what most people can access. You can call us. We have our 800 number, the website. You can Google us. A lot of people find us through Google because they just need something for their kids or for themselves.
Yeah.
I had a therapist from Utah County call 2 days ago saying, I have a 54-year-old lady who really needs what I'm so thrilled to know there's IOP, mental health IOP for her, so we're available. Just search for it and we're here.
Thank you for all that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Give your husband a hug for us too, because, of all the things, I really feel like the first responders of our day are mental health professionals. Yeah. This is the challenge of our time. And so thank you for all that you do.
Likewise, we are very impressed with LÉVO, and my husband really wanted to be here today, but we got to get an admissions person. We have to, speaking personally.
We'll do it another time.
For sure, yeah.
Thanks again.
Thank you.